Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Adam White. I'm one of the founders of Positive Planet. I'd like to welcome you to this session on LCA, EPD, and LCC, where we're going to demystify some of the key tools shaping how organizations make sustainable and informed decisions. Before we get started, just a quick bit of housekeeping. Obviously, please make sure that you can hear us, so make sure you're unmuted and your volume's up. Feel free to drop any questions into the comments as we're going through, and then we'll sort of circle back to them at the end. And if there's time, we'll answer them, and if there's not, we'll get in touch afterwards and just sort of get your questions answered for you. And just a reminder that this session is being recorded. Today is really about helping you understand when and why to use lifecycle-based tools, how they differ, how they can work together to support businesses and outcomes across compliance, cost control, and environmental reporting. A little bit about Positive Planet. We are, for those of you that don't know, we're a full-service sustainability consultancy. So we work with clients of all sizes and industries to take action and to reduce climate impact. I'm delighted today to be joined by Michael, who's our principal lifecycle assessment consultant. Michael brings deep technical expertise in and extensive experience across this sector, and particularly within complex supply chains and regulated sectors. I'll hand you over to Michael, who will take you through the rest of the session.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for the introduction. And yes, so as principal lifecycle assessment consultant at Positive Planet, I've got as Adam mentioned, a long history of working in lifecycle assessments, but also product carbon footprints, environmental product declarations, and also other bespoke analysis around environmental impact. But my career goes all the way back to my PhD in advanced metallic systems. And it's really that understanding and experience both within lifecycle assessment and also materials science that has allowed me to work across a whole host of different manufacturing and materials sectors. So let's dive straight in. Today, we're going to be talking about LCA, EPDs, and LCCs. And really, I'm going to be focusing on why these tools matter for your business. And when businesses set out to improve sustainability performance, these three terms often come up. And each tool plays a different role in measuring and communicating impact, but together they provide a powerful toolkit for making better decisions. Now, importantly, you might not need all of these tools. You may already have quite a comprehensive cost model internally, or you may already be monitoring, evaluating, and reducing your environmental impact. But selecting the right tool can really benefit and improve your business performance. But just taking a step back and looking at a high level as to why we might want to use these tools, or why we do use these tools, you can see on the right hand side I've stated that there is growing pressure, and there has been for a few years now, to report on environmental information, and not just environmental but social and governance aspects as well. And there's a need for this credible, defensible data without the risk of confusion and misuse, i.e. greenwashing. And even within each of these tools, there are multiple frameworks and standards and methodologies for these assessments. And selecting the right tool for the right decision and the right objectives can lead to those improved business performance. One aspect I just want to focus on a little bit in a bit more detail is compliance and regulations. And these tools are working across all of these different areas. We're increasingly seeing life cycle thinking and methods and environmental analysis being embedded into these different policy areas. And I've listed just a few examples here. We've got the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulation. There are upcoming digital product passports that are going to be mandated within the EU, and behind digital product passports is a whole host of environmental information that you'll need to collect about your products. We also, of course, have CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, both in the current EU, but also the upcoming UK CBAM. And inherently behind CBAM is a host of data collection and embedded emissions reporting. More sector-specific construction products regulation. Here, EPDs and LCAs and LCCs encouraged and may soon to be mandated across particular materials. BREEAM and LEED, again, certification systems that encourage the use of EPDs and reward the use of EPDs and encourage LCAs and lifecycle costing. In the future, NHS Net Zero Roadmap. They'll be required, suppliers will be required to produce product carbon footprints. Right now, it's proposed to be from 2028. There's also national requirements and encouragements around these tools, especially in countries such as France and Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands. There's also the battery regulations where product carbon footprint declarations are required for certain batteries, with more and more different systems being included in those regulations. But let's talk about three tools. So LCA, LCC, and EPDs have a common foundation of life cycle thinking. So this is expanding from just an understanding of what's going on in your own organization, but looking at that wider supply chain, both upstream and downstream, and for use phase and all the way to the end of life considerations. All these three tools are complementary in this regard. LCA and EPD focusing on environmental aspects, while lifecycle costing is, of course, focusing on that financial aspect. And just one area, more technical area, I just wanted to introduce if you don't know about this, but it's a common theme again across these three different tools. And it's the idea around the system boundaries that you set for these projects. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about the system boundaries in the coming slides. So now I'm going to introduce each tool just in a couple of slides, but I'm really going to focus on the reasons and the value of each of these tools to your business and why you may need to conduct such assessments. And we're going to start with life cycle assessments. So for anybody that may have joined my previous webinars last year, you may notice a similar slide here as an introduction to life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment is a structured, comprehensive, and internationally standardized method used to measure the life cycle environmental impact of a product. Now, we might be talking about climate change or product carbon footprint, as you may have heard, but also other impacts as well, impacts related to emissions to water and soil, and also other emissions to outside of climate change. I've highlighted system boundaries, and I just want to talk about the different terms that you might see within each of these tools in terms of system boundaries. So you may have heard the term cradle to grave. So here we're looking at the very upstream raw material extraction as the cradle through manufacturing all the way to the grave, which is the end of life considerations. The objectives of the study might be slightly different though, and we might be focusing on the upstream production of that product. And therefore we may set the gate at the customer gate as opposed to including those downstream aspects. We might even refine it even more and look at an individual life cycle phase, and that will be known as a gate-to-gate study. And of course, we might include more circular economy aspects, looking at the recyclability, reuse of the materials used in the system, and you may see the term cradle to cradle in that regard. But let's talk about the value of LCA and some of the reasons that we do this assessment. And this is not an exhaustive list, of course, and these are just some of the common high-level reasons why we do conduct LCA. And again, just starting at the very key point of understanding your own environmental impacts for the products or services that you are offering. And once we have that understanding of environmental impact, of course, we want to explore the ways that we can reduce those impacts, and we can assess those alternative solutions and the effect on the wider system. You can then embed that within your product design and planning, whether it's looking at alternative materials, alternative suppliers, different fuels and energy supplies, alternative end-of-life considerations that you might need to consider and advise to consumers. You might want to communicate environmental information to your supply chain, your client base, or other stakeholders, and LCAs being a comprehensive methodology are a good way of doing that. Working with suppliers. LCAs can actually help you work with suppliers more closely. I actually did a project last year where the suppliers for the commissioner of the study were on board from the project from the very start, included in all the meetings and the data collection. And we really helped the suppliers understand their own environmental impacts and how they can reduce their impacts, which coincide with the commissioner's overall product carbon footprint and life cycle assessment. Indirectly, we can see some reduction in business costs as well from some of these more sustainable solutions. For example, you might find alternative materials or suppliers that lead to a lightweighting of that system, a reduction in material usage, which has a cost reduction, positive cost reduction on the overall system. We have already mentioned compliance and regulations. The methodologies and frameworks behind LCA are, as I mentioned, increasingly being embedded in many different policies and regulations around the world. So by conducting an LCA, you're getting that deep understanding of what needs to be done in order to comply with some of those regulations. And finally, enhancing your brand reputation. You don't want to just be seen as having a sustainability tab on your website. You want to actually show that you are doing meaningful action and really trying to understand and reduce your impacts on the environment, and that show to your stakeholders that you're serious about this area. So moving on to environmental product declarations. So an EPD is essentially a standardized way of communicating that environmental data. Now, behind an EPD document or EPD project is a detailed, comprehensive LCA study. However, that LCA study has been conducted according to a strict set of rules that are called product category rules. Now, these product category rules are dictated by what we call program operators, and I've used a few logos for some of the largest program operators in the world here. Got the international EPD system and also a national EPD system as well. Now, the idea is that because we're conducting the LCA to harmonized methodology, other products that have also been conducted, the LCA has been conducted within that PCR, product category rules, then those products are comparable, which they will be. Now, you still have to be careful when comparing EPDs, and there is a discussion within the community around the fact that multiple or different program operators do tend to use different PCRs, which negates the whole idea of the comparability of EPDs. So you do still have to be careful, but the harmonized methods within these PCRs does allow for that comparability. So why do we do EPDs, and what are the reasons and what are the benefits? Well, of course, as I mentioned, behind an EPD is a comprehensive LCA study. So all those previous reasons I mentioned for conducting an LCA are obviously still valid for doing an EPD. But of course, there are a few other quite key advantages to doing an EPD. Point number one here, market advantage and accessibility. Usually when a client approaches us and says, oh, I think we might need an EPD, but we don't really know much about them, first two questions that I ask are you being asked for EPDs? And do your competitors have EPD? Because if you answer yes to either one of those questions, then you are potentially losing business because you don't have that accessibility to EPDs for your wider customer base and stakeholders. I've already touched on compliance a few times today, but especially within the construction sector, there are quite a few compliance policies and certification systems that either encourage or mandate the use of EPDs for certain projects. And again, by having EPDs accessible, you are giving yourself that added market advantage there. And finally, as I already mentioned in the previous slide, EPDs are a good way of publishing credible, defendable environmental information, and that's partly due to the third-party verification process that all EPDs need to go through. So on to my final tool for today, so that's lifecycle costing. So like LCA, LCC is an analytical method that determines lifecycle aspects for a product, system, or asset. However, here we're looking at the financial aspects of the product system. And you can see in the figure on the right-hand side some of the categories that you would expect to see in a lifecycle costing exercise, from those upstream initial costs through to maintenance, operating costs, but also end-of-life considerations as well. And actually, the system boundaries for LCC can be set up to be very similar to LCA, of course, with slightly different inputs and outputs, but they do complement each other very well when conducted within the same assessment. So just to finish with this final tool slide, looking at the value on reasons why we might conduct lifecycle costing. Obviously, reason number one, when we get that understanding of the total costs of ownership across that life cycle of the product or system that we're analyzing, we can then look to reduce those costs through one way or another. And this is because lifecycle costing analysis allows for that strategic allocation of funds, focusing both on those long-term savings, not only on those short-term gains. It helps to ensure optimal selection of materials and technology, for example, can help lower maintenance and operational costs, or more efficient operational and maintenance costs as well. And it can help minimize those replacement costs through use, and also include those end-of-life or disposal considerations. And with that comes improved budgeting and financial forecasting, which sort of goes hand in hand with point number one there. So similar to how LCA can indirectly highlight some reduction in business costs, a standalone lifecycle costing exercise can indirectly show an improvement in sustainability aspects. So again, we might see, for example, after doing a lifecycle costing, we might highlight some energy efficiency gains, energy consumption reductions somewhere through the lifecycle process. And of course, a reduction in energy consumption has a positive environmental impact overall. We can help enhance quality and value of the asset by ensuring that it remains functional and efficient through its useful life. Now, decision-making based on lifecycle costs can lead to that better asset management and reduce the risk of that any premature failure or excessive maintenance requirements. And finally, similar to LCA again, one of the main reasons is on a comparative level. We want to look at those alternative systems that we might be considering and what are the effects of those alternative systems in terms of the commercial aspects. So my final slide before we move on to next steps and Q&A, just wanted to run through some of the ideas around why and what sort of questions you might be asking yourself or from external stakeholders in terms that will guide you to using these different tools, whether it's one tool or multiple tools. So for example, you may internally be asking as a company or as an individual in your position, do you want to understand and improve your product or company sustainability? It's quite a big, broad question, but LCA will help you achieve that understanding and improvement in terms of product and company sustainability. Or are customers asking you for environmental information? Again, LCA will provide that data and information. Do you need data for Scope 3 emissions reporting? Again, the methodologies and frameworks behind LCA will give you that Scope 3 emissions understanding. As I mentioned, behind an EPD is an LCA, so you have to do an LCA for an EPD. But in order to understand whether you do actually need that EPD, again, I highlighted those two key questions that I usually ask our customers that approach us in order to look for that deeper understanding. And that is, are you being asked for an EPD or do your competitors have EPDs? And generally, if the answer is yes to either one of those questions, then we can delve deeper into what we need to do to deliver that EPD. And also, as I mentioned, EPDs are a good way to publish third-party verified environmental information. And finally, on lifecycle costing, again, if you want to understand that wider total cost of ownership for that product or asset, then lifecycle costing is a great tool to do that. But if you want to combine sustainability with financial implications, then complementing an LCA or complementing an LCC and vice versa, they do work very well hand in hand. Now, you might be getting questions both internally and externally on wider whole life costs rather than just short-term cheapest options. And again, life cycle costing will provide that level of information. So, thrown three very big tools at you today. What about next steps? Now, if any of those questions align with your own thoughts and you do want to discuss more specifics around LCA, EPD, LCC, or product carbon footprint, then please book in a meeting with me. You can do that by following that QR code. If you take a picture of that QR code, that goes straight to my schedule for the coming weeks and months, and we can have a more detailed discussion around the specifics of your product system. I'll ask a few key questions that will allow us to pull together a quote and give some timescales. And within a few days of that discussion, we'll provide the details of that proposal with those pricing options. So I am on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect, or also feel free to drop me an email and we can go from there. So thank you very much, and hopefully we have some questions and comments.
Thanks for that, Michael. I've a couple of questions have come in. I see the first one on the screen from Tracy asking, how do people use EPDs when they have them?
Okay, yeah, good question. So as I mentioned in the EPD section, EPDs, the idea of EPDs is to compare them, assuming that they've been conducted according to the same product category rules. So in the construction sector, for example, EPDs have been very commonplace for a number of years, and architects and contractors and building firms will use EPDs to assess the environmental impact of different materials and product systems and embed that within the processes for that construction product is one example of how EPDs are used. But also, as I mentioned, communicating that environmental information, EPDs are a good way of doing that as well. So I hope that answers your question, Tracy.
Thanks for that, Tracy. And we've got one from Ali. Michael, Ali says, are any of these tools commonplace in the food and drink industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things with food and drink industry that initially come to mind for me. One is on packaging, and the other is on actual food and drink itself. And we've had projects, and we've had many discussions with people within food and drink around understanding product carbon footprint, both from, let's say, an individual meal perspective or a menu perspective, but also obviously packaging is a big area for environmental analysis. There are regulations that are already in place and coming in around understanding environmental impact, but also the responsibility of that packaging once it's on the market as well. So yes, there are, it is quite commonplace in food and drink, but down a few different avenues, both material and actual food and drink wise.
Thanks, Michael. A couple more of questions have just come in. So Tracy's just sort of followed up with, we're asking what we should look for when evaluating different EPDs.
Okay, so in every single EPD, even across different program operators, there should be in the first couple of pages the standards that have been used in the PCR, the program operator. So what you want to check is the standards that have been used. So for example, construction industry, the core standard is M15804. So you want to make sure that if you're working in the construction sector as a starting point, that they've used that standard. And then you want to look at things like the system boundaries that I introduced, but also what the unit of analysis actually is, because sometimes the results can be displayed in, let's say, per kilogram, per ton, or it might be different. It might be per one unit. It might be, for example, a kitchen cabinet unit or a chair or a bag of something. So there's different ways to display the information. So you do have to be careful with what you are comparing. So you do have to look into the details of the documents.
And I think if we can just squish a quick answer into this, this last one from Rashid, which is asking how AI is transforming this space.
Good question. So this is, and this can depend on who you talk to. So my personal opinion, and I have used a number of AI-based platforms for LCA. My personal opinion is that AI is a great support tool for the LCA practitioner. It can help save time with aspects such as background data research and general understanding of manufacturing processes and process flows. It can be very useful in saving a lot of time there. Where I think it can't replace the LCA practitioner, firstly, is in the interpretation of the results, but also in terms of filling in data gaps. I have seen systems that are trying to do this, but depending on the prompts that you give it, ultimately, from my experience, the outputs are not a sufficient quality that it's actually going to save the practitioner any time. So the time that I save in building a model is actually replaced by having to check every single input, output, and background data set and the associated literature instead. So I think it will be a powerful tool in the future, and there's a lot of people developing it. But I think at the moment it is very much a support tool as opposed as to replacing a practitioner.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everybody for your questions today. I think we're quite close to wrapping up now. I think all that's really left to do is to just remind everybody about the next webinar that we have coming up in this series. So we've got the 2026 Sustainability Reporting Landscape webinar will be the next one. Bryony will be hosting that. Bryony is our head of sustainability, and Emma will be on that as well. Emma is our principal ESG consultant. That's taking place at the same time, 12:30 on the 28th of January. And again, the QR for that is on the screen if you've not already registered. And should you have any more questions on today, want to join this, or questions about anything else that we might be able to help you with, then obviously please get in touch. And thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for joining.